Welcome back to another episode of the Distil-Nation NZ podcast. My name is Tom, and I'm joined by my friend Cameron, as always. Cameron. And today we've got a fun guest here. We've got Tash McGill. Welcome, Tash.
Thank you.
It's really cool to have you in Christchurch for, well, you were in Christchurch for Dramfest. That's where we saw you before, but you don't get down here too often.
Well, I do, yeah. I don't always tell people when I'm down. That's the thing.
You're sneaking around town.
Yeah, but no, it's been great to be down here this week and visiting with a few whiskey peeps. And
you've come down on a good week because I've pulled a sample of the whiskey we've got coming out this month. So I figured let's just drive right into this.
Dive have a drink.
We've been standing around for a while talking, so let's have a drink.
Okay.
And then we can go from there. So this is cask strength.
Fabulous.
53.8. And this is what I call my Dusky corn whiskey. It's malted corn, malted wheat, malted barley. It's a bourbon mash sort of bill. And then this one has been aged in new American oak and then finished in a maple syrup barrel.
It's rare to dive straight in. We introduce a guest. Don't ask her any questions. Put the sample in front.
I just figured we all need a drink first. That's all. We've been...
That's true.
We're in a new space, so I don't know how this is going to sound on audio and whatnot. It might be a bit echoey, but let's just enjoy it, you know. But I'm quite excited because I haven't done a Dusky in a while.
No,
and I'm excited to get your both opinions quickly on it because
you haven't done a Dusky cask strength release either.
No, this would be the first of that.
And have you done a Dusky maple?
No.
So it's a first in a number of ways.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I don't think I've done a Dusky the same way twice. So.
Well, I was going to say this is my second time sampling. You sent me a Dusky previously, which I really enjoyed. My only complaint was the size of the sample bottle. What?
That's fair. I only have one myself. So.
But I mean, off the bat, great nose, right?
I'm hitting the yellow corn right away. It stands out for me, and just that bit of sweetness from the maple.
So there's just a hint of that kind of horse-hay uric acid, right? Which doesn't sound like it's a good note, but it is a good note. It's what you want. It's what you want.
So what is that? Because I actually don't know.
Oh, it's basically it kind of smells a little bit like a stable.
Right? Yes, so, yeah. I actually get that quite a bit across my spirits, and I quite like it.
It's a desirable, highly desirable. Yeah,
that's good because I enjoy it. I grew up on a farm, and I love the smell.
So it leads you in it, and it's a great because from that particular note on the nose, right, it takes you into quite a few other places. So really opens up some of the vegetal quality of what's going on, and provides a freshness, you know, to some of the sweetness of the corn, which starts to pop through. So
it's very well described.
Thank you.
Usually I would just say green grass. Like almost dried green grass, you know, out in the field sort of thing. That's sort of But what do you reckon?
I haven't gone in for the sip because both of you had, and I figured I had to make intelligent conversation while you both did that. But no,
if we ever start having intelligent conversation,
well, then we're in real trouble, aren't we?
We'll have to cancel all
Guys,
this.
it's okay. That's what I'm here for.
So we've got Tash for.
She brings the jokes.
It's quite sweet, eh?
It's very sweet, but it's very. Got a real toasted sweetness to it, right? It's French toast with that little bit of char and the pan going on. There's quite a bready element to the sweetness, I think. Really, it's really big in the mouth straight away. But even at that cask strength, it's actually quite approachable.
Yeah.
There's definitely, it's alcohol heat versus, you know, pepper or spice. There's very little of that going on, but some which you wouldn't expect there to be. But there's definitely some underlying, there's definitely some underlying cask character that I think is coming through. Yeah. It's not dominated by the maple, which is nice.
No.
But the maple is certainly really present. Like that first sip is just like, whoa, hello.
It's a wonderfully complex sweetness. That it's not just bourbon, vanilla, caramel. There are some wonderful layers going on added to with the maple, the different grains that you have used. I mean, I can only echo what she's been saying because, yeah, it's wonderfully layered, wonderfully complex, big and chewy when you have that sip. That I'm hoping, if the water can just take the edge off of that heat without kind of diluting the mouthfeel too much, I really think you're onto a winner.
Interestingly, right, just with a couple of, in combination, it's been sitting in the glass for a little bit, but also adding a few drops of water, and the nose starts to open up to like maple toffee character, right? Those Canadian candies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course I know.
Of course. But maple toffee, big on the nose. And then the pull through. So this to me is a whiskey that, because it's so sweet, it's, like it pulls really all the way forward in the palate. So really approachable.
It is on the tip of the tongue, isn't it?
Yeah. People are really going to want to kind of keep coming back for that sip.
Yeah.
But then it dissipates quite gently in the back of the palate. I think the alcohol burn is like really manageable, right? It's in that it's got a pleasant heat. It's not drawing too much burn as it's kind of going down, which I think sometimes you can get with a cask strength, where you're like, but yeah, great. That's lovely. Well done, mate.
Thank you. Now you've said some nice things. Say some bad things.
Well, I mean, how do you feel about consistency, right? Because you're making a small batch product like this. Is consistency something that you are aiming for? Hey, wait! All of a sudden, I'm interviewing you guys.
Oh, it's fun.
Oh, notice that change.
Not me.
That turn. No, your turn's coming. Just you wait.
Oh, wait.
But yeah, so what role does consistency play in terms of
my ethos with my whiskey so far has been that I decided from the start that I was going to have years of exploration, basically just small single barrel batches where I can play and figure out what works really nicely while I'm still in a small setup, because eventually I'm hoping it'll be bigger.
So Tasmanian of you.
Yeah, isn't it? Peter would be proud of me over at Belgrove, wouldn't he? So I really want to play with the different casks, the different grains, the different smoke sometimes, depending on what it is. Like the last Dusky had a bit of Manuka smoke in it, which I actually quite enjoyed, but it covered up the corn a bit too much, and then...
Pretty combative.
Yeah, whereas this one is a touch sweet for sure, but it actually still showcases the corn quite nicely, so I'm not hugely against this idea.
So what was the mash bill on this? Was this all the way...
it's about 60% malted corn and then split evenly between malted wheat and malted barley. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. Something about that, yeah. And then, new American oak for about a year and a half. And then it's been sitting in the maple syrup barrel for, 6 months. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I wonder if, I think the wheat's present in some of that mouthfeel, but I wonder if it was knocked back slightly in the cask in terms of that finishing cask, and didn't have quite so much forward punch and that maple sweetness, that the wheat might bring a little more creaminess to it.
I think with that sample I sent you in that first one, it was super creamy, and I think that was the wheat for me. That was that. Yeah. So this is fun. Yeah, that's because it's another thing to try, which I don't think we've really tried in New Zealand. So maple syrup barrel.
Yeah, great.
It's been done. Now check it off.
Now it's been done. The exploration continues.
Yeah, exactly. Now I think the next one's now. I'm going to go back to pretty standard bourbon mashes and new American oak, or just used American oak, depending on what's coming down the line. I think I might stay away from some of these funkier Duskies for a while.
Okay.
And see how that goes. So.
Funkier, do you find them funky to work with? Like when you say funky...
I say funky like out there, like just different,
Yeah, right, okay.
Weird and different, yeah. Funky. We say things differently. I guess we use all words differently over in
That's the beauty of communication. Now, are we going to turn the tables? Because we've said that we have Tash McGill, but we've provided no context.
Yeah, we just started drinking.
You just dove straight into that sample there.
And I do have questions for you, Tash. And my first question is, what do you do? Because you do a lot, I know.
That's a very long-winded question.
But yeah, just tell us about everything.
Well, the short answer is that I'm a storyteller and a strategist.
Cool.
So a lot of people in the spirits industry, I think, for a long time probably sort of knew me more for the storytelling side of things in terms of, Instagram accounts or social media or, what have you. And obviously, I've spent a long time now writing about spirits, both in the New Zealand space, but also, international products. So that piece is, still a really important part of what I do. But I'm also a strategist. So my background is in broadcast communications, brand marketing, digital work, but always at a relatively high level kind of strategic space. So these days, I really enjoy, because obviously I'm only about 27, so I've just crammed all that experience into a really short period of time. That's a joke, guys.
Okay,
come on. So these days, really much more about just focusing and honing in those skill sets and the work that I do in, I guess, a platform that I call More Good Drinks, which is I'm very focused.
Yeah.
So my work is, I have a technology company as well in Rotorua, and so my work is very much sort of focused on technology, storytelling, strategy,
Tourism
tech, yeah, for better outcomes. So that means better outcomes for business. Always want better business and better spirits businesses, better products in the marketplace, better consumer education, better laws and regulations around those things. That's kind of the primary focus. So More Good Drinks is the space that is both an advocacy platform, but also trying to push our industry and the fullness of our industry, right? So not just bartenders, not just distillers and producers, not just big international brands, but actually everybody all together. Our industry in New Zealand is not big enough to kind of separate everybody out. So liquor retail is just as important actually as some of those big brand machines, as the smaller producers, as bartenders, as sales reps, I always like to champion the fact that actually without our liquor retail teams and the people that work in behind the scenes there, we wouldn't have the industry that we do. So it's really important to keep that focus on this is what our industry is as a whole, and this is what we need to do to be better, just a little bit better every month, every year. We'll see us in a much better space as an industry. So that's kind of what I do.
That's pretty cool. So More Good Drinks is also a podcast, right? You do a podcast?
Yeah. So podcast, newsletter, it's there's some how-to guides that are coming out over the next couple of weeks. A range of bits and pieces there. And then I still, where I can, I write and speak about, spirits and a few other bits and pieces. President of Food Writers New Zealand, so there's a bit of food that gets thrown in there as well. There's occasionally I host a tasting, just is there, pour me a drink, I'll be there.
That's cool. Yeah. Hey, you mentioned that you do some advocacy and stuff like that. Now, I remember one of the first times we chatted was over email for the New Zealand Whisky Association.
Yeah.
Is this still a thing? And
yeah.
What's going on with it?
Yeah, so really, so the New Zealand Whisky Association was formed just a couple of years ago. Yeah. And we've really been in just kind of silent behind the scenes mode because we've largely been in a deep tranche of research around pathways to seeing the kind of regulation change that we would like to see. So there are a number of different spaces and components to how liquor legislation works in this country, and we're also tied into a shared food standards code with Australia, which means that a lot of basically a decision that we might make here or a desire that we have here is both subject to but also requires some input from our equals in Australia, and we have very, very different industries and very different desires. So we set up the Whisky Association, a small collection of distilleries at first, off the back of finalising the New Zealand Whisky regulations, which exist as bylaws as part of Distilled Spirits Aotearoa. So if you are a member of Distilled Spirits Aotearoa, by being a member you agree to make your New Zealand whisky and your New Zealand single malt according to that set of regulations, which we tried to follow as much of a lead from established traditional markets as possible, while still maintaining enough openness for innovation and for development and for business, right? And so some things that are very important to the Scotch Whisky Association, we've actually said they're just simply not practical to have as part of our regulation here. So where does that all go? Basically, there's a few different tranches of things happening. We were involved with the UK New Zealand FTA, the Free Trade Agreement negotiation, which has a very substantial wine and spirits annex, which is primarily about how, in our trading relationship with the UK, people such as, or groups such as Scotch Whisky Association are protecting their GIs and their labelling, their requirements, their recognition through that trade relationship. The Scotch Whisky Association doesn't really have any beef with what we're doing here in New Zealand, but they are very interested in getting recognition and the Scotch Whisky Association definitions and the things that have been agreed to in that UK New Zealand FTA are recognised in the shared Food Standards Australia New Zealand Code, because things are a lot more wild over in Australia, and they're not moving towards self-regulating that industry anytime soon, for lots of reasons, and that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. So,
quick side note: do you think it entirely feasible or possible that in the 1860s the British government, British financial institutions put the kibosh on New Zealand distilling because basically they wanted to protect? This is the theory that has been floated. We don't have any actual evidence, but it was basically like you kill the New Zealand distilling industry and we will then approve the loans going through for your railway project.
Well, that would have been an influence of the temperance movement versus I think any indication of the industry, because you've got to remember that the industry, as we know it today, didn't exist in the same way.
No, it didn't.
And so there wasn't necessarily any requirement or desire to protect the Scotch whisky industry at that time in the same way that they do now. So, for example, if you're competing for space on a ship between bottles of whiskey or casks of whiskey or casks of rum or what have you, if you're competing for trading space, whiskey, rum versus people, sheep, cows, when they were desperately trying to establish the colony known as New Zealand that would become the food pantry of Mother England, then I personally find that a stretch too far. But I think what was probably important to consider is that during that time, the temperance movement, again, very different to how we know the temperance movement today, but there was a desire for temperance. There was a desire to protect and limit the exposure of Indigenous peoples to things that were already seen to be problematic. There was a large conservative religious component to the colonisation of New Zealand and the influence of those laws. If you go back to say the original origins of the 1908 Customs and Excise Act, and then that's pulled forward into the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act that we know today, and there still exists, and this is probably my life's work, will be to have this changed. But for very good reason, I believe. It still states that you can make alcohol and sell it as anything you like from any agricultural source, so long as it has the colour and the appearance of the product that you say it is. So written into law in New Zealand is the fact that you don't have to actually make whiskey from barley or corn or grain. You could make it from whatever you like and put colouring and flavouring and wood staves into it so that it has that appearance, has that smell, has that colour, and you could legally put that on the shelf. Now, a lot of people now would get up in arms about it, but that is the reality of what's in the law. So my personal passion, but also the desire of the New Zealand Whisky Association, is to make sure that when whiskey in particular is made in New Zealand, that it is recognised by law as this is how we make New Zealand whiskey. So you can make anything you like, you can sell it as whiskey, but you cannot sell it as New Zealand whiskey unless it is what have you. That's what our bylaws with the DSA and the Whisky Association, actually, that's what we're after, right?
Quick clarification. We've talked about distilled spirits Aotearoa on here before. Does it sit separate from the New Zealand Whisky Association partner? Just quickly outlining that kind of...
So distilled spirits Aotearoa obviously represents more than just whiskey makers.
Of course.
And I don't discriminate against spirits. I'm very spiritual. I love all spirits equally. But the endeavours of the Whisky Association are different too. So to be successful in the whisky business long term at volume in New Zealand, you have to have an export strategy and you have to be thinking about those external markets. So things like the excise tax debate, which are very important for local producers who are largely selling to a local economy, that has a different weighting and a different level of importance than say, actually, we just want to protect the New Zealand whisky name, both here and overseas. And so that was part of the reason why we set up the Whisky Association separately. Now, we have a handshake agreement that they are sister organisations, so we share our work and development, which at the moment, as I say, it's mostly been researching the various legislative pathways to seeing the kind of change that we want. There are some things that I can't talk about in terms of activity that's happening by other international parties to get their whisky laws recognised in the FSANZ shared code. But ultimately, FSANZ has some challenges. That's great. Cool. SWA, go for gold. Get your stuff in the shared code. There are 11 different bodies that are responsible for enforcing the code, and so you can guess how much enforcing happens. The majority of enforcement that happens is around labelling and around claims that are made on labelling. And I was talking about this with Jesse Mulligan the other day. He was doing a piece on RTDs, right? Because that's the big space where this really comes into play. And one RTD brand says about another RTD brand, well, they're not even using real tequila, they're just flavouring it, it's agave spirit, it's not real. Now, if we want to talk about GIs, Mexico is a wonderful place to start. Hooey! But, and I love to talk about Mexico and the amazing things that they've done, and also the challenges that they now face as the industrialization of their mezcal and tequila industry is happening. And there are some really interesting political shifts around the way that they're making regulation now to actually try and squash down certain things and to, potentially harm or prevent ancient practices of making spirit from being legal, right? So totally different, but this is the reality of, and what's driving that? Big business is driving that. What's driving that is brand recognition. So fingers crossed we get into FSANZ, the SWA gets recognised in FSANZ, that's all well and good. But for New Zealand, what we want to make sure, the thing I was saying to Jesse is that our packaging and labelling laws are currently stricter on what you can and can't say about what's in your bottle than actually ensuring that what you put in your bottle is actually what it says it is. So in many places in the world, so there's absolutely nothing wrong with bulk ethanol. It's great, it's totally fine. I give big shout outs to Byron Bay Distilling Co, who they claim it really loud and proud on their RTD, the Pina Colada, where they say it's just alcohol, right? So they're not claiming that it's vodka, they're not saying that it's rum, it's just alcohol. That's what's in the product. That's fantastic, that kind of transparency is great. But for a lot of the RTD products that are on the market, they are using a variety of different alcohols, and some will be calling it vodka. And there are places in the world where you wouldn't be able to call it vodka based purely on the fact that it's gone through a three-step industrial distillation process versus going through traditional still-based 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 runs, right? So that's kind of where we get into interesting space. The interesting thing for us is that what we see, I do quite a bit of work with some of my Food Writers members, they work for Plant and Food as research scientists and nutritionists, and that's really where you get into the fun around, the claims that they then have to investigate in terms of, can somebody say this on the label or not say it on the label. And again, in the New Zealand spirits world, we are still kind of the Wild West when, well, actually you can, call it vodka, and that's fine. It doesn't mean that it's bad, but is that really what we want, right? So a big key to go, okay, I'm picking up an RTD, or I'm picking up a gin, or I'm picking up whatever, and you want to know what is that base neutral spirit being to start with. You look for, does it say that it's 100% vegan? So if it says that it's 100% vegan, then it's going to be sugarcane or it's going to be grain based. Depending on the price point of that product, it's more likely to be sugarcane based rather than grain, although grain is certainly available. Bulk grain vodka is available from Australia at a not too unreasonable price, and some brands will call that out. The Carlo Espresso Martini, for example, in a can, states really proudly that it's made from grain-based vodka. It's fantastic. Terrible product, but fantastic that they're being transparent on the label. And that's what we need to get to, right? And my kind of drive on this, gosh, I'm talking a lot, sorry.
No, this is great. I'm just letting you go. It's good.
But my drive on this, right, is that, go back to why the Whisky Association and the DSA. Whisky Association really wants to see our whisky regulations recognised as a GI in law. But what I really want is for consumer education and health to come to the centre of what that legislation is about, to say, if we want to have good drinking culture in New Zealand, you can talk about price point, you can talk about marketing, you can talk about all of those things, but you have to get down to people deserve to know what they're putting into their bodies. Whether or not it's good for them or bad for them or whatever, they deserve to know exactly what they're putting in. And so if it's rum, there's another case that I could talk about where, and a producer a brand owner who wanted to make a product and, didn't understand that actually, there's a very specific process that you go through to make rum from sugarcane or sugarcane byproduct, that you can't just add flavouring to ethanol. You can't just add spices and go, oh yeah, so now it's rum. In the same way that you can't add a little bit of tequila to ethanol and make it tequila, right?
Right.
Consumers deserve to know that. And so if we don't recognise it in the law and actually make it really specific and clear from the basis that if consumers know what they're drinking and producers are bound to those same principles, it's only then that we can really start having a meaningful conversation about premium and about quality, because we have to remove this baseline possibility. Now, most people will tell you that they're not doing it, and that is genuinely true. But the principle of the thing remains, right? Let's just get to a baseline where we say, when we're talking about alcohol made in New Zealand, we know that rum is going to be made from sugarcane byproduct. Gin is going to be made in one of these, 4 recognised, globally understood ways of making gin, not juniper flavouring at the bottling plant. Because that does happen, right? And so that's bad. That's bad. It's especially bad when they put craft on the bottle because consumers don't know. Why don't consumers know? Well, because there's no baseline from which to have that conversation. And those are the things that I think are really foundational if we want to have. It's the principle of the thing. Damn it. But those things are really important if we want to have meaningful conversations about health promotion, right? Because from there, then you can have a really interesting conversation about, well, why are we achieving so much year on year, decade on decade since the 1970s? New Zealanders are drinking less. That's a phenomenal achievement. So why are we still going to war with messaging about binge drinking and binge drinking culture when actually we've been doing a really good job of getting those messages out there? But we're doing a really good job of getting those messages out there with only $11.8 million a year. And that's what gets paid into the health promotion agency. It's the HPA levy. Now, a lot of New Zealanders, if you start to talk about excise tax, they would make assumptions about where their excise tax goes. But their excise tax goes straight to the general government coffer, right? So you start to go, okay, so there's actually billions going into that excise tax each year. that is not being used, and it goes up every year, right? Every 6 months, because you want it to be predictable. It rises with the consumer price index, falls with the consumer price index. Apart from, I can't recall that ever happening. So if we want to have meaningful conversations about that, why are we not having a conversation about why the excise tax and the HPA levy are so imbalanced? And why are we not talking about what a great job we've done in reducing harmful drinking? And why are we not having a really real conversation, which we can tell, you go into the data and it's all laid out for you, right? The excise tax split between wine, beer and spirits, dramatically different. But where is the problem drinking happening? The problem drinking is happening in, unfortunately, middle-aged white men and women, but predominantly male, and it's in heavy consumption of wine and beer. And that's in the consumption data, right? Now, spirits has been performing really, really well. Spirits is starting to actually drop off in terms of, retail sales. We're already seeing big differences and changes in the way that consumer behaviour is happening around that drinking principle. So you have to start asking the question about how do we have a tax reform conversation that prioritises the health and the understanding and the well-being of consumers, with making sure that it is what it says it is. And then how do we have a reasonable conversation about how the industry can contribute to that? And how do we have a reasonable conversation about how we rethink our tax laws and requirements around spirits and alcohol based on the imbalance between local and imported beverages and spirits? Because it's the international big boys, because of their volume, and girls, big boys and girls, but it is those big spirits companies that wield a lot of influence and spend. But you could argue that they play a really safe game, because they don't want government to come down any harder or any further, but they're not playing the same game that local producers are. And so, let's not have a conversation about excise tax reform for small distillers, because why does somebody who's bottling their product out of bulk 200 litre IBCs and adding flavouring and essence to something at a bottling firm, why do they deserve an excise tax break versus the person that's carving their guts in the weekends? There's so much nuance to it.
There is.
Rant over.
No, that was a lot of topics. And I wanted to touch quickly on a couple of things, because the HPA levy, that I pay that every month with my excise bill, and it is so small compared to the actual excise dollars. And I always look at that and I think I'm happy to pay that one. The excise one I hate paying, but the HPA I'm happy to pay that. It makes sense where it's going. I know where it's going. The other one, I know it's going to some stupid government thing that has nothing to do with alcohol, and it just bugs me every time I hit pay. But yeah, I don't think people realize just how little is actually going back to alcohol harm prevention.
Yeah.
And you talked a lot about transparency, and that was one thing when I thought about the idea for my distillery and I was getting going. I told myself on the labels, I just wanted to say everything. I want people to be able to geek out on what's in this bottle, and because I found so through the years, I go and try somebody's whiskey or gin, and it could be made in New Zealand, and I just think to myself, what is this made from? Where is this from? What part of this is this and what part of this is that? And I know for a fact that there are whiskeys that are a lot of overseas whiskey and only a little bit of New Zealand whiskey, but I only found that out years after the fact, after trying to find out from the person who made it themselves, and they told me it very hush-hush, and it's that, why should that be so hard, and gin especially, when you say, it's going to be made from, what's it made from? Who cares if it's made from whey? I want to know, I'm making stuff from whey and I put it right on the bottle, if I'm making a gin. If I'm making it from grain, I put it that it's made from grain. Just tell us what it's made from, and then stand by with your choice, that's all.
Yeah. Well, and then you start to get into that conversation about, again, packaging and labelling. So is it made in New Zealand or produced in New Zealand, manufactured in New Zealand? Each of these things means something different. And none of it is inherently bad.
No.
Right? So blending New Zealand made spirit and imported spirit there's nothing inherently bad with that if the end product is produced with care and attention to detail, and it's a good quality product. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever, right?
Yeah.
But it is, I think, to your point, it's the transparency of it, and being able to go, okay, great, this is what this is.
I just want to know that,
Yeah.
you know. I'd like to know that part of it was not made in New Zealand, but that's, you know, I could still like it. Doesn't mean I won't like it, but I would like it less if I found out about that after the fact. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just on principle. So.
And I think, you know, there are distilleries that do a great job of that transparency. And you, like the Byron Bay example, right? Like, I'm just going to tell you what it is. That's fantastic. And the one thing that you can kind of guarantee is that Mexico is really good at enforcing, both Mexico and the SWA are really good at enforcing what they care about. So really, they do a better job of policing and safeguarding whether or not something is actually tequila or mezcal or, you know, than often what we do. But the fascinating part, I think, the fascinating part is that where you can, so in the very beginning stages of our rebirth of particularly whiskey here, the strand of barley that was desired wasn't readily available here, so it had to be imported from the UK. Now, you know, okay, let's talk myth busting. A lot of Scotch whiskey is made with grain that's been imported, barley that's been imported from England, right? Because it's not growing in enough volume, right? So, okay, like if we can be transparent about that, surely we can be transparent about, oh, okay. But as soon as that barley was available here, then Cardrona made the shift.
Yeah.
Great. But you make the shift based on quality, based on availability, right? And again, what is that attention to detail to making the best possible spirit that you can. So, transparency for the win.
I agree. Yeah.
And beware all health claims made on labels. Side note.
Especially alcohol. Yes. There shouldn't be any on alcohol, to be fair.
I want to read out. We got a question coming through one of our social media channels, which is great because we always welcome questions. And you know, if you have something that you would like to know or a topic that you want to cover, please at Distil-Nation NZ let us know. But this question was, and I'm quoting here, so you guys just about NZ shit. Which, in fairness, yes. Yes, we are. That's very much part of the Distil-Nation NZ. So one reason I got excited about you coming on was because you do have much more of an international lens than what we do. You're keeping an eye on what distilleries are doing across, I see your travels in North America and elsewhere. What are the international trends that you are picking on, either consumer facing or industry facing? What are those trends that you see could be or perhaps should be making their way over to New Zealand?
Ooh, big question, great question.
It's a big question.
So you guys just about NZ shit? Question mark. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's so much to talk about it, you know, in terms of New Zealand, but I think some of the things to pay attention to are that we are on kind of a rolling tide. There are some things that will just hit us, whether we're ready or not ready, and there are some things that generally tend to arrive here, you know, sometimes it's 5 years. That's historically we've been 5 to 10 years behind the trends. Yeah. So the big kind of cocktail revolution kicking off in the 1990s, it kind of got here by like 2002, 2003. And that's fine, right? Now, obviously, speed of data, transportability of information and ideas moving much faster. So some things now are like, oh, it's 18 months. Some things are 6 months, particularly in sales trends, consumer trends. Like, it's pretty close. It's like 6 months. Right. So one of the rolling tides that will hit us, whether we like it or not, it is already hitting us, is that premiumization has moved. So for a long time, and this should be thought-provoking for New Zealand producers, particularly craft producers, for a long time, premiumization was on the rise. And that super stratosphere of ultra-high net worth luxury goods, that's still going. That's always going to be, you know, that's always going to be on the rise, or at least it's going to be sort of somewhat stable. But premiumization is rolling to an end in terms of current consumer trends and behaviour. We're seeing a return to mid-price products, which have actually always been really good, right? So, because And again, it's that scenario of, craft, and this has happened in the States as well, that the word craft has kind of become synonymous with volume instead of actually quality, right? So I'm small, therefore I'm a craft distillery. Well, no, you're small, therefore you're a small distillery. And the attention that you pay to the way that you make your product and the quality of that product is what's going to determine whether or not it's craftsmanship, craftspersonship, or, a fun hobby. Brutal, but true. And so that presents some challenges around where consumer spend is going, right? So Bombay Sapphire, we're going to start seeing that kind of rise up again because it's accessible. Gordon's as well. And that's interesting because New Zealand's been in the gin boom, and we are now coming to the end of New Zealand's gin boom. It's been in decline for about 9 months. The retail kind of sector has caught up with that in the last 6 months. So retailers have been slashing their gin SKUs that they carry in the catalogues. One retailer sort of found that through their various model, that actually ended up with about 300 gin SKUs on their books. And so they were like, hey, we really need to go through there. But interestingly, that tells you about a problem that I don't know that the New Zealand spirits industry is kind of ready to talk about, but it is also a problem that's been happening overseas, right? So gin boom, consumers move to a curiosity mindset, and so they start becoming really interested in what's new, right? I want something new, I want something different, I want whatever. And so you lose that baseline of consumer loyalty where actually somebody's just always got a bottle of Gordon's or someone's always got a bottle of Bean in their cupboard. That's what they go to. And so that, which has been part of that premiumisation kind of movement and moment, again, that's starting to contract. And we're seeing that contract a little bit in the US, but we're going to see it contract a lot more here. Other things that I think are really interesting, I was just talking about this with someone today, the sleeping giant that is soju. Soju's an incredible Korean spirit. It is, you could almost argue that it's more complex and more interesting than whiskey. It's certainly got a ton of rich cultural history and importance, and it's delicious when made well. And that is a sleeping giant. Currently in New Zealand, this little fact was shared with me by somebody today, that currently in New Zealand, it's over 8,000 bottles of soju are being sold a day in terms of the volume that's moving through. Yeah.
Wow.
And so internationally, soju is starting to kind of kick off, and it's definitely a sleeping giant here. So we'll absolutely see that, hopefully in the next little while, really start to move. So that's exciting. Tequila is still on the rise internationally. Mezcal starting to become, I think, more and more significantly a player. But again, that comes back to some of, there's availability, but there's also some of those regulations that I was talking about. So tequila went through a very large industrialization kind of move in the 1980s, 90s, where some of the artisanal kind of methods at high volume production were moved into much more industrial kind of processes. And so when you start to talk about tequila and mezcal, you have artisanal, you have ancient, you have industrial, and so some of that has really had an impact on the way that the agave sector is changing. And I think, again, we're going to see some more of that kind of filter down here in the next little while. Tequila's been hard to get hold of in New Zealand for a long time. Yeah. We don't drink enough mezcal. We should be drinking more mezcal. Tickety Boo Liquor has the most exciting portfolio of mezcals. I just think it's incredible. But yeah, so, more mezcal all day. More brandy. Yeah, brandy and cognac. That's my passion. That's my passion project. I think it's going to take a long time. But more brandy, more cognac, I think is. So we make brandy in New Zealand. We make it actually. Winemakers make brandy. Okay. They make it for their own supply. They make it for their own drinking. They make it for salad or gifts for their loyal customers. So my desire, and I know of a few already that are starting to make that move to go, actually there might be a commercial product in this, But, you know, cognac's going through some big shifts internationally as well. You know, the Hennessy hip-hop days are starting to broaden. And an incredible company, Fawn Weaver, she and her husband started Uncle Nearest, which is Tennessee whiskey. And she and her husband, their company, has just purchased a cognac distillery in France. And so there is a big rebuild project on, and some quite revolutionary kind of cognac's been something that's been very kind of sheltered. It's been cloistered. It's been, you know, kept in a certain way for a certain period of time. But that's obviously going to open up some big conversations internationally. And then there are smaller house producers like Tesseron, who, you know, for centuries have been producers in the cognac space, but for other brands. So about 20 years ago, they made the shift to say, no, we're actually just going to release our own product now. And so some of these smaller houses are starting to release product which is helping people to engage in cognac in a slightly more open way. You know, less mystery and shroud, a little bit more openness, a little bit more provenance, a little bit more production story. So I think those things are really exciting in terms of what's happening internationally. And provenance is huge, right? So I judge lots of spirits competitions, but mostly what I'm always interested in is kind of three principles, right? So provenance, process, and principle. So what is it that you're trying to achieve? What is the provenance of where your product is coming from? And then what is your process? And how does that process, you know, marry up to those things? And those things actually are the definition of a good drink before you even touch lips to glass, you know? You can actually say, okay, is this, in terms of quality, in terms of aspiration, in terms of what we want to see for consumers and the kind of products that we want to champion, those three things can tell you so much about a product before you even get to the glass. Because it's not just about whether or not you like it, but can you appreciate it, right? Can you understand that here's this thing that you're trying to do, and when I get to the glass, do I understand that, and do I see and experience the benefit of it? Yeah, so I think we're going to continue to see provenance. I mean, in the Pacific Northwest in particular, I mean, Rogue were kind of some of the first to do it from a brewing side of things, and then very quickly a lot of brewers, craft breweries in the Pacific Northwest in particular, really started to pay attention to longitude and latitude of where their grain's being grown. You know, where are my hops coming from? What's going on here and here and here? Water sources, you know, pH levels, all that kind of information starting to get loaded into cans. And we're seeing that, of course, in whiskey, not at as large scale. But I do think we'll just continue to see that push coming down internationally, which is great.
See, my brother gifted me a bottle of soju for Christmas, and my brother-in-law, his partner is Korean, so I kind of opened this up. He was on a video call with her, and I kind of leaned over his shoulder to say, my Korean's a wee bit rusty, but can you tell me about this? Kind of held it up and turned the bottle around, and she assured me that it was good and endorsed by a K-pop star. But clearly I'm going to have to revisit.
Must be good.
Well, it must be good, right? Yeah. So I'm going to have to revisit this bottle here and dive in a wee bit deeper, because I'll admit it's a big gap in my knowledge there.
Yeah, I don't know anything about soju.
But all of I think back to all of the bourbon bros across TikTok who are talking about a huge range of bourbons and ryes that they just every now and again, of course, there's Blantons and Weller and all of that. But then once you branch out past that, they're talking about all of these different things that I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
Never seen it on a shelf here. Never.
Oh, and never will. Never will.
I feel like that's another sector that there's a whole lot happening over there, but just the tiniest, minuscule portion of bourbon, rye, North American spirits actually finds its way over to here.
Yeah, well, and that's a numbers game, and it's also a consumer game, right? So New Zealand, highest spend per capita in terms of Jim Beam, right? And Beam is a great brand, great product. It's consistent, it's quality, it's you know, benchmark. And some people will be surprised to hear me say that. Now, but when I say benchmark, and I say this equally, Jim Beam and Jack Daniel's, they are supremely well-made examples of their type, and that's one of the reasons why they're accessible and they're consistent and they're driven by loyalty, right? The consumers of those products as well. But then what happens in bourbon in North America, or American whiskey, I would say, is the broader category, is very similar to what's happened with gin here, right? So they don't have the same time constraints. So Kentucky straight bourbon, you are working with some time constraints, but the actual material turnover and the volume at which they're producing enables then a whole bunch of cask finishing, grain experimentation, or experimentation with multiple parts of the process that's rolling out. So you're starting to see a lot of that kind of pop up, and you're also seeing the barriers to market, barriers to entry are not massive in the States, particularly when you get into localized production. So that's really exciting. There's a cluster of distilleries, in Colorado now, High West in Park City, Utah. Yep. They're 20 years old now, 26 years old now, but they were one of the first. This is interesting, this is kind of heading out west, there's wild, crazy things, going on. Westland whiskey, up in the Pacific Northwest. Woodinville whiskey, right, which hardly anybody ever knew about, but Remy Cointreau, purchased them, they picked them up. Some of what is happening there is very similar to the gin scene here in terms of that explosion, that consumer curiosity. In New Zealand, we're very unlikely to see a lot of that product translate over, and that's okay because not all of it's good, right? But part of the challenge there is that actually New Zealanders just don't drink enough bourbon. We're not drinking enough American whiskey. We haven't even got for a lot of consumers, they haven't got from Beam to Basil Hayden's, right? They haven't got to Knob Creek. They haven't got to small batch. They haven't got so we've got a big kind of work to do to actually get the New Zealand consumer into even kind of more midpoint and premium bourbons and American whiskies, so that we can start then having conversations about this interesting thing or this interesting thing. I think Hancock's are doing good stuff there. They've got a lot of hand select barrels that are coming in from Jack Daniels, so it's a good story, to be able to engage people in. Oh, there's more than just Black Label or the Gentleman Jack. But yeah, again, it's some of that is about how and where we're framing bourbon in this marketplace.
Well, speaking of, do you want to introduce this one that you've chosen to share with us?
Maybe I'll introduce it because I actually do know a little bit about it.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll explain if I may.
Yeah, please.
That the invitation was to select a whiskey or to select something from the shelf, and I thought, well, this is I've seen it before, I haven't tried it. I don't know really anything about it. And so I was like, let's just go into something that's really fresh and we can, dive in. Yeah,
I followed these guys for a long time because this is sort of a brand that resonates with me, is the word. But they are a farm distillery in Kentucky, and they grow Bloody Butcher corn. And so this is what they do. They make bourbon from Bloody Butcher corn. This is their 4-grain one. So it is the Bloody Butcher corn, which is red, malted rye, malted barley, and malted wheat. It's 49%. And it's
How do you say that name?
Jeptha Creed.
Jeptha.
Yeah.
It might be harder to say in your accent.
Jeptha Creed. Yeah.
But it's a beautiful bottle, I will say that. They sure did a great job with that.
Yeah, and that's nice texture.
But it's a different smell and taste for sure, isn't it?
I mean, it's really buttery. That's probably the big note that comes off for me. In terms of, yes, okay, so there's corn, there's a little bit of creaminess from the wheat. There is word association, you want to be careful, but it definitely the malt feels almost more present, right? And it feels kind of red ale-ish, right? Which is, again, it's conflation, but it's that very warm, toasty kind of malt character with this big kind of sweetness underneath. Lovely, so that's a really nice start. But then buttery, I just get super buttery on the nose.
I get like an old leather must, like if you were in a tack room that's been sitting too long and there's dust settling on the saddles, and that room. I get that room.
Yeah, there's varnish and polish going on.
Yeah, a little bit of that.
A lot of waxy kind of things.
There's
a bit of waxy red apple skin, actually.
I'm just stuck on the fact that it's from Shelbyville, and now I've got Simpsons in my head.
Oh.
That's
But I love what they're doing because, and that's I had family over there in the States last year, and I said, could you go just scour any liquor shop you see? And I sent them to this like small place in Chattanooga. Is it
Chattanooga,
right? Chattanooga. And it was like called like Jim's Liquor Store or something, and I was like, I don't know what you're about to find in this place, but just check and see if they have it. And they said this was the best liquor store we've ever been into. The selection was crazy, and the people there were so much fun, and they did happen to have it. But I think the whole farm, like on the farm, they're growing that unique grain, that Bloody Butcher, which is one that I have laying down as well. I was so excited to finally be able to try that. So, yeah.
There's a real sharpness to it once you get into the palate, which I'm guessing is, what are we at ABV wise? 49?
49.
So, there's I would say that this is sprightly. It's pretty energetic and bouncy in terms of both texture, but also the alcohol heat. Really front forward on the palate there, but surprisingly smooth on the way down, which is nice. As you start to work through that, then I start to get way more toasty notes coming through. Like, there's a little bit, there's not too much char, but there's a little bit of that kind of, crunchy kind of grain between the teeth texture. Yeah. Which I enjoy. It's not overly sweet. It's quite sharp. You'd almost pull through some lemon citrus notes, but almost in an oily kind of component.
You got your work cut out for you, Cameron, because she's
she's a professional. Yeah.
See, on here, Cameron's usually the one that I just sit here and say, yeah, I like it, and Cameron goes into the details.
Sorry, Cam, I'm not.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah.
What's your vocabulary? Your taxonomy of whiskey notes, of tasting notes. Like, do you have a place that you start? Like, do you look for sweetness first, or do you look for the malt character and then you break it down from there? Or do you just kind of let it wash over you in a wave of experience?
In a wave of experience. Wow.
Or a writer, yeah.
That's a great question, and honestly, that was something I was chatting to Anthony at Divergence, who said that I should be going for the W sets because it provides more of a framework for the way that you look at things, approach things, and break things down. So probably that would be...
It's a good assessment framework for sure.
Yeah.
It's not... I wouldn't... But because it's an assessment framework, it gives you a selection of language to use for each component or aspect of the spirit that you're assessing. So colour is, there's 9 options and you pick that option. So it doesn't necessarily have the romance or the poetry of, burnished amber, green gold flecks, the sun slipping beneath the horizon type, as I'm describing the colour of this, and that's, you kind of go, oh, okay, there's some green rolling hills of Kentucky, in that late Midwest sun, or late Southern sun, which I do so enjoy. I'll be there in a couple of months. It's going to be very exciting.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, okay, interesting. So when you unpack this whiskey for me your way.
I have tried this before, so I'm not coming in with it blind. And it's always trying to find in some cases it's trying to find a point of comparison. Where I really started was getting 2 glasses at once and then sitting down, because I found it in the very beginning when I was really trying to start writing tasting notes and testing myself. I found it easier to do I can describe this one in comparison to this one and pointing out those differences and maybe points of similarity, and that was where I started to try and train myself to then actually write descriptively about flavour and texture and aroma.
Can I just say, coming back to my maple dusky over here, after smelling this one, like, whoa, like this just becomes like maple cream, like.
Pour some sugar on me.
Yeah.
Woo.
Did you have any left in yours here?
Right, because I think... Yes. What? And we found that with the divergence as well when we had those two peated samples, the ex-bourbon and the Pinot Noir, that you had the ex-bourbon, you went to the Pinot Noir, you went back to that ex-bourbon one, and it was bam, it was bright vanilla and creamy and that really rich.
Yeah.
Was there any peat in there? Just on the nose?
It was subtle.
No. It was
subtle.
It was subtle. It wasn't the big hitter.
So with a few drops of water in this guy, this for me opens up to what I'm expecting off like a 4-grain style. You know, there's corn, yes, it's fresh, but there is some there's some astringency to it. It's definitely got some sharpness. With a few drops of water, it really does start to open up and give a little bit more of that that kind of what I would call like deep grain character, where it's a little bit textural, it's a little bit crunchy, it's still a little bit green. As I said before, it's got a little bit of that toast, but it does feel from my palate, it's a little bit more balanced with a few drops of water.
Yeah.
I think. Oh yeah. I think that heat just overrides it a little bit, but delicious. I mean, the thing with most, well, not all, but we take a very traditional Scottish approach to drinking bourbon. But this actually, high humidity, thunderstorms rolling through at 4 o'clock and on 4 o'clock of an afternoon in Kentucky. This over a cube of ice, some large format, is going to sit really nicely with that dilution.
This is something I find a lot of Kiwis struggle with, is when they drink bourbon, they just compare it to Scotch all the time, and then it's just like you're drinking it wrong. Yeah. It's meant to be big and bold and in your face and yeah. It can be subtle and beautiful too, but most bourbon is going to be punch you in the gut a little bit. Here's a ton of flavor, and I'm going to shove it down your throat. Yeah,
like there's a big kind of caramel finish on this, which is almost leaning like burnt caramel. Just a little bit toasty, but again, it's yum. It's just fun to explore it and go, okay, cool. I see what you're trying to do there. I think they've done a nice job of showcasing that corn. Yeah. But it's a really supportive mash bill, right? With everything else that's going on in there. And I love the use of wheat. I just think it's so... I love wheat. Wheat and with corn goes together so nicely. Yeah. But I'm a Maker's Mark girl from way back, so, what you gonna do?
Would a big ice cube actually either round off or kind of soften some of those kind of greener edges that you were talking about there? Maybe is that...
I think it's going to give it a little bit. Specifically for me, it's just that additional little dilution is going to just let that heat of the alcohol finish just evaporate a little bit, and so it's going to just make it a little bit easier for me to get into the spirit without having to kind of do battle with that alcohol burn, right? And also because it does like the alcohol burn, anytime you feel it is desensitizing your palate. Yeah. So, there's a famed swirl and throw and spit, ambassador of old who always regularly would cut down to 35%, and I'm absolutely in his camp of I'll drop mine all the way down even if I'm just drinking at home, because I'm like, I want to enjoy it. But I'm a different kind of drinker. I'm a pain. Someone throw me a Woodstock and cola, would you? Hashtag make whiskey and coke sexy again. That's the tasting coming your way very shortly.
The whiskey. If you were to pick up some real craft cola producers and say, right, I've paired this whiskey with this coke. And
I've done it. I've done the pairings. Yeah. It's just a matter of finding time to take it on the road.
There would be some people who would find that so triggering. It would be
one of my favourite tastings. One of my favourite tastings last year was the pickleback tasting.
Right.
In which again, right, American whiskey good time. Let's go picklebacks. A lot of people don't know or understand the pickleback tradition. It's the name pickleback is kind of attributed to a bartender in the 2010s. But actually it's been around for a long time. You spend any time in the south of America and, you know, pickles, bourbon, pickle juice, that's what you're doing. It's like the number one grandpa's.
So as a mixer or?
No. So a pickleback is take your bourbon and take your shot of pickle juice after the bourbon.
Oh, okay.
And so matching them is amazing because you have all these different styles of pickle juice, right? And then you match your whiskey to the pickle juice. So you want to go spicy McClure's, you want to go like traditional bread and butter, all that kind of stuff. And each of those, that vinegary, sharp, sweet pop actually accentuates different flavours in the whiskey because it's all about just waking up your palate. Like, how can I taste more? How can I taste more? How can I taste more? And it's very hydrating.
In Canada, we have the Caesars is the big rave, you know, with the Bloody Mary sort of thing, you know, the tomato juice, and then you just throw such weird stuff into it. And, you know, you'd have your summer parties and everybody would bring like their own ingredient. And, you know, somebody's bringing their pepperoni sticks, somebody's bringing their pickles, somebody's bringing salmon, somebody's bringing, you know, who knows what, hot peppers. I mean, you just name it, it's coming in, you know, and you're chucking it in your drink and it just looks like a explosion of ingredients sitting on top of your...
The farmer's table in La Mesa, my old hometown in the States, they served a Bloody Mary pitcher, and you could order one of three variations, but one had jalapeno poppers, roast chicken, like fried chicken, like, you know, all kind of like, but hey, why not? I've never been more pleased to be allergic to raw tomato in my life.
Oh yeah, that'll do it.
But there was somebody on YouTube, they were looking at our video of tasting Vaughan from Good Bones' vodka and essentially said you're drinking it wrong. And I'm like, okay, well, enlighten me. And basically her premise was that if you're drinking vodka by itself, you're not doing it right because you need to have your cracker with your caviar, you need to have your pickled herring, you need to have your cured meats because you have the vodka with the thing, and that's the way that you're meant to drink it, by all accounts.
I think she should call us back out of the tundra.
To each their own, I suppose.
Hey, but there you go. All
Well,
right,
let's
any
wrap
other
it up.
questions?
Yeah, let's wrap it up.
Right,
That was awesome. This has been like an hour, so thank you, Tash. Thank you for giving us your time. I hope you enjoyed those samples. To anybody listening, make sure you send us some questions, distilnationnz@gmail.com or at Distil-Nation on socials. And thank you for listening. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers, team.